first thing in the morning. Hope everyone has their coffee or tea before we get started. I know I have my big cup of coffee next to me, and we're excited to get started this morning in just a sec. Okay. Seeing that it's 9:04, I'll kick us off and then I'll hand it off to our board chairs of the TA and SamTrans for our opening remarks. So I'll do housekeeping items first. So thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Patrick Gilster, the Manager of Programming and Monitoring with the San Mateo County Transportation Authority. As I mentioned before I hand the mic over, I'll give some few basic instructions for how we will be running the meeting today. Participants will not be able to unmute themselves or share their video until we have these small breakout sessions in the second half of the event. If you have a question during the event, please locate the chat function and select the person labeled questions. That will allow you to send any technical questions or questions during the panelists that you'd like answered to send there as well. And we'll select a few of the top ones to be able to ask. And then we will aggregate all the questions at the end and get some responses to those, and we'll post those to the registered attendants as well. As I mentioned, during the speaker panelists, you may also submit those questions there too. Today's agenda will include, I should mention too, if you're joining by phone, please use *9 to raise your hand so we can select you, and *6 to unmute you. Unmute yourself when we break out into the small groups. And then finally, at the end, we will have a live poll feature to report back on some of the things we've heard throughout this discussion as well. So today, we will cover a wide range of topics. Today's agenda includes 2 different panels. The first will include representatives from AV companies that are deploying and developing AV related vehicles or systems or data. The second will include representatives from public agencies from across the country who are piloting AV technology now, that we can hear from some of their lessons learned. And then we'll break into the small groups at the end, where everyone will be assigned randomly. And then we will have discussions led by facilitators from WSP, who's helping to put this on for us, and SMCT, San Mateo County Transit District employees. So we'll be looking to hear what your thoughts are after you hear from everyone about where do you want to see AV deployments or pilots or strategies potentially be developed or implemented in San Mateo County next. And then now, because I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing from me already, let's kick this event off. I'd like to hand this over to our co-host. So happy to introduce the chair of the San Mateo County Transportation Authority and Burlingame City Council member, Emily Beach, and then also the chair of the San Mateo County Transit District, SamTrans, and Belmont Mayor Charles Stone, who would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Hand it over to Emily first.
Hey, thank you, Patrick. Good morning, everybody, and happy early Thanksgiving. It really is my honor to just very briefly extend a warm welcome to every single one of you on behalf of the entire board of directors of the Transportation Authority and our amazing staff. We know everyone is busy, and we're so grateful you chose to be with us either live here today or even watching the recording as we come together to learn about what it really means to start moving towards an autonomous future here in San Mateo County. So as many of you know, our agency, the TA, it really exists to improve the mobility and the quality of life of the residents of San Mateo County. And we do this by investing literally billions of sales tax dollars. Thank you to the voters of San Mateo County who have said yes over the years to Measure A and to Measure W. And we help deliver and fund infrastructure projects and programs that make our communities more sustainable. So that's really why, together with our sister agency, the San Mateo County Transit District, we thought it was important to prioritize and convene this workshop here today. We know that progress is being made on autonomous vehicles, both in the personal vehicle delivery realm, the shared subscription autonomous vehicles, and also delivery of goods. And I think our goal for today that we've all agreed upon is to think about what is it that our cities and our agencies and the county should be doing in terms to prepare for this new technology, in terms of adapting our infrastructure, our policy, our land use decisions, and our transit systems for this autonomous future. All of us who are leaders in San Mateo County, we work hard to really address the needs of our communities today, but we also have a duty to look into the future and what do our communities need 5, 10, 20 years from now. So that's really important part of what we're doing here today. I remember pre-pandemic, about 2 years ago, there were many of us who are on this call who had the privilege to tour Zoops in Foster City. And I want to give a shout out to the Foster City Council for making that possible, and the mayor at the time, Sam Hindy. And we had the privilege to hear one of our panelists today speak, Dr. Mark Roskheim. I remember a few of us were speaking with him afterwards, and I asked him, what is it, Dr. Roskheim, that we should be doing as leaders in cities and in the county to prepare for this? And he said, convene and talk and have conversations, come together, cross collaboration. And that's what we're doing here today, particularly in ground zero for this technology in the heart of greater Silicon Valley. So thrilled we are here. Appreciate staff for making this happen. We couldn't be more excited to dive into this work together. And without further ado, I'm honored to also invite my co-host, SamTrans Chair and Belmont Mayor, Charles Stone, to say a few words on behalf of the Transit District. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for such wonderful words too. And I wanted to take a brief moment before I start my remarks just to welcome everyone, but also to welcome especially our colleagues from the elected official community. I see SamTrans board members here, TA board members here, supervisors here, and thank you for taking the time to attend this today. The San Mateo County Transit District, colloquially known as SamTrans, runs the San Mateo County bus and paratransit systems. And beyond that, we're involved in many different types of transit in the county, like shuttles and commuter rail. And as some of you know, we also own the Dumbarton Rail Corridor and hope to someday activate that. Our vision is to provide transportation choices in a sustainable future that meets the needs of ever-changing and diverse communities in an equitable way. That's why we're here today, to learn from pilot programs and peer agencies about what could be implemented by us, such as connected transit, and how local jurisdictions can help pave the way for this future. And while we know this isn't going to be here tomorrow, it's probably going to be here in the next 5 years. As Emily said, we've got to be thinking down the road how this is going to look and how we're going to deal with it. So without any further ado, you certainly aren't here to hear us talk. Let's begin. It's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. William Billy Riggs. Dr. Riggs is a professor and program director at the University of San Francisco School of Management. He leads USF's annual Autonomous Vehicles and the City Symposium, and is the author of the forthcoming book, End of the Road, Reimagining the Street as the Heart of the City and Disruptive Transport, Driverless Cars, Transport Innovation, and the Sustainable City of Tomorrow. Those were 2 titles, not 1. And the second investigates the rise of shared and autonomous vehicles. Good morning, Dr. Riggs. The floor is yours. You're muted, Dr. Riggs.
You'd think after a healthy pandemic, our excellence in Zoom would be more acute. So thank you, Emily. Thank you, Dr. Stone, or Professor, Mr. Stone. I appreciate it.
My mom would really appreciate that promotion.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here, and the introduction, Emily, was really spot on in terms of, I think, the world we're entering through, where we have an opportunity to rethink urban systems. And so what I want to do today is just walk us through some questions that I think you'll hear some of our speakers today really bring up, And I'm going to focus on four key concepts: this idea of new platform, new behaviors, new policies, and new opportunities. And the idea here is I've spent about 20 years of work both as a professional practitioner and the last 10 years as an academic, really thinking about not only the way that technology will frame the way we know and respond to the environment, but also how urban planning systems, and I'm really proud to hear you say, Emily, that land use maybe needs to change as we rethink and as our mobility systems change on top of that. So it's a real opportunity space, and I take it from a very positivist perspective. I know that there are a lot of simulations that say doom and gloom, but let's jump right into new platforms and how we know that transportation technology is changing. And so what does that mean? We're going to hear from a lot of these companies. I've got some graphics up here that will be referenced later, from the Cruise origin to Neuro's delivery vehicle to the fantastic innovations that Zoox is putting forward. There are a number of companies. I think we have about 60 companies in California working right now. But it's not just a revolution. That's not about the car. I think we see an entire mobility platform. And that's why, I put a Lime bike up here. We actually have a number of companies that are seeing mobility as a service as the future. And so I think maybe the starting point for today is can we get to the point where mobility is a service, just like running water, just like turning on the tap? And I think that's maybe a grounding place. But before we go there, I think you probably have seen many, if you've been to any of these other people, and I see some familiar faces who have come to many of my talks in the past on this call, whether it's at our autonomous vehicle conference or at Transform, it's important to kind of ground us in this idea of levels of autonomy. You've probably, if you've done this, these are just how we classify how vehicles know and respond to the environment, levels 1 through 5. Why I say this is, when we think about, and this is from a paper that Sven Biker, who is at Silicon Valley Mobility, and I wrote a couple years ago, we aren't at this idea of fully autonomous vehicles or level 5 vehicles yet. We're right here in this sweet spot of level 3 vehicles. And that means that, yes, to a certain degree, we can operate vehicles in very limited situations, but we are seeing an increasing tendency towards vehicles that are level 4. And I think there is a tension, and I'm going to name the tension really quickly in terms of how our some of our OEMs, and particularly Tesla, are kind of nudging what might be considered a level 3 or level 4 technology. But we're really talking, even with kind of the Tesla Autopilot vehicles, about what is a L3, what we call ADAS, or Advanced Driving Assist system. Now, what does that mean in terms of time dimension? So when I showed this prior slide, I was talking, if you read down this, you can think about this in terms of technology acceleration and levels of autonomy in terms of from top to bottom. Level 5 is probably the furthest way out. Sven Baker and I also talk a lot about phases of deployment. And today, kind of our frame is what's going to happen? What can we do in the next 10 years? And I'm going to break that up into what can we do in the next 5 years to prepare for the following 5 years. And I present that to really just propose some questions for later about what's really past it. Because I really feel the low-hanging fruit right now in terms of our technological acceleration and what we're seeing from companies like Zoox and Cruise and Neuro and GoMomentum and CCTA and a number of the people you hear from later are fleet deployments. And excuse my spelling error there, and transit deployments. And that's really, when we think about the next 5 years, that's a huge opportunity to harness the power of autonomy. And the following 5 years after that, the way that Sven Biker and I talk about this is that a lot of that depends on what we do today. Can we create transportation systems that actually outcompete the desire and out provide the capability of people wanting to get into a privately owned, perhaps cheaper autonomous vehicle at that point? So what does this mean in terms of what we need to do in terms of behaviors? A lot of this and a lot of the way we think about automation and a lot of the way we model it, this is where transportation models, we've speculated a lot about what we can do to increase road capacity and increase throughput of vehicles through automation. And just if we think of streets as pipes and we're pushing water through pipes, if we're thinking of roads as conduits, we could push more vehicles through those with automation. Now, does that induce additional travel demand? And that is where there's a lot of research that guesses about that. But basic economics would tell us that if it's easier to travel in a car and not transit, then we will likely see what we call induced demand. So we will create a situation where people travel more frequently and further. And the question is, will they do that in a way that is in a private vehicle, or will they do that in a way that is in a vehicle that is shared? Rideshare applications are really the proxy that we have to think about this. And what we do know from the lesson of Uber and Lyft is that they did increase VMT. They did increase travel. And that's a non-binary issue. It's a thing that had benefits, both economic and mobility, particularly for people with reduced mobility, but it also has potential negative impacts, particularly as many of the vehicles that we see on the road today are up until 2035, when Governor Newsom says we will have a all electric fleet, or we will be going all electric. But we really see an increase in travel. And if that's not electric travel, it does bump up against many of our climate goals. I think the lesson here is that, is it a lesson for transit? There's a lot of case studies in Ride Austin was a good case study. And I challenge you to look into this as policymakers and planners and engineers. TNCs were a real lesson in terms of filling in the gaps for transit, and also exposing, I'll call them warts in transit, how transit didn't go where people wanted to go. And, I think there's been some dialogue in the Twitter sphere and the ether sphere about, what this means for transit. I don't think it actually creates a hostile framework to transit, but what it does is that actually, maybe it calls us to a certain amount of accountability as transit agencies and transit providers, in terms of this idea that travel behavior is complex and multimodal. And I don't think perhaps many transportation planners, perhaps myself included, were willing to realize that at the beginning of the digital revolution, when Steve Jobs was up introducing this iPhone. I don't know that we actually fully understood how revolutionary that would be to our transportation systems. I think we also were flat-footed in terms of our demographic capabilities, that people wanted more choices, more movement between modes. And research shows that they were actually choosing multiple modes over trips, but they actually, weren't moving away from if transit would have provided for them, they would have used it. There's a paper by Lisa Rao in San Francisco. It was Lisa, Robert Severo, and Susan Shaheen, that talks about what consumers were wanting in their trip behavior, and then what ride sourcing or ride sharing tools were providing. And they were providing more reliable, convenient service is the number one thing, and more ease of payment. And if our dialogues about shared payment system in the Bay Area are any indication, there's been a lot of difficulty in getting us to a single payment card over our kind of numerous fragmented transportation systems. Last slide on this is that, one of the real things that, and this is for some data that Stephen Gerke from the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission in Boston has gathered. This is a publicly available report from MAPC in 2019 that showed that actually a lot of ride sharing trips, and we use ride sharing as a proxy for automation, actually complement transit and happen during off hours. And I think you'll hear I'll show some stuff a bit later, and you'll hear some stuff from Cruise about how they're considering perhaps their pilot. So we've moved from behaviors. Let's go to policies. Again, using rideshare as a proxy, a lot of this stuff is happening, the regulatory policy happening at the state level. Here's the kind of the lay of the land in 2014 with regard to ride sharing policy. Here's what it looked like in 2017. Passenger service being regulated at the state. That was what happened. That was basically, that ship has sailed. And so what does that mean from a regulatory framework for automation? Well, the federal government has provided some guidance on what we call operational design domains, or the situations with which vehicles can operate. But a lot of the regulatory framework in California is happening at the state level for vehicles to operate in roads across the state, across jurisdictions. And that's from two agencies, the California DMV, which is regulating the vehicle and the vehicle safety aspect with guidance from the federal government, as well as through the California PUC, which is monitoring both the drivered passenger service pilots, so carrying vehicles with a safety driver in a vehicle, as well as a driverless pilot. As of last week, here is the California PUC permits issued. Some familiar things on here. You'll see here that there is only one approved driverless pilot right now, and it's actually in phase, and that's from Cruise, who you'll hear from on one of our pilots. There was a press release about the driver pilots from Waymo and Cruise, but there is a distinction between a driverless passenger pilot and a driver passenger pilot. It's important to highlight. Last week as well, on November 4th, or week before last, Cruise applied, and this is a public document that they've taken a snapshot on, and I think it's important to highlight. And why I say this is, you can see here the intent here, at least in Cruise's application, is to explore a fleet-based rideshare service that is in fact geographically bounded in San Francisco. So it looks at geographic or geofencing within operational constraints that have been, I believe, and perhaps we can get clarification from them, that have been brokered into dialogue with the city in terms of the city roadway. So it's an important kind of benchmark for us to look at, as this is the first driverless pilot that's really gone forward in the state. And so what does this mean for new opportunities? I'm going to put out a lot of ideas now, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to them in the discussions as we proceed today. You know, an opportunity to harness and really capitalize on the new consumer behaviors. You know, consumers want integrated payment. They want safety, two-way identification systems that actually allow for knowing, you know, the safety of their ride. They want flexibility and transparency. They want a cell phone app. There's been some interesting partnerships that Lyft and Uber have done with cities in terms of filling in gaps in their networks. This is, again, a potential proxy for the way we may think about our transit in the future. And you'll hear from Via later. Via's got some very interesting projects with UC Irvine on the left here, as well as with an elderly community, I believe in Brisbane or Melbourne, if maybe they can clarify that a little later. There's also an opportunity, and this is a big area that I think that the TA might be able to play a role, is to really think about networks and system planning, about how vehicles in constant circulation, what that might mean to network flow. And if we need to think about demand planning differently, Farron Piers and I, for the last couple of years, have talked a lot about this idea of classifying a backbone and that maybe a high capacity transit, whether or not that's bus or rail, we don't have to dictate that. And then thinking about, if that's the backbone, how do we not poach that backbone? How do we preserve our core transit services? And then think about, well, let's sprinkle on crowdsourcing. Let's sprinkle on what can be a door-to-door service to maximize accessibility. and also thinking about how that relates to our position and towards level of service on our roadways. And I mention that because a level of service is no longer an environmental threshold that we can rely on, but increasingly, as we move towards more vehicles on the road that may be automated, we might actually think about how those vehicles might free flow on our roadways. And so level of service may have increasing importance. This is also important as we think about bills like SB 50, which thought about our roadways or our rail corridors as these linear networks surrounded by development buffers. But if you really think more differently about it, and Peter Calthorpe and I from Urban Footprint have been doing some work on this, and this is some modeling he did a couple years ago that actually show, well, if we thought about it as a network, maybe that opens up more opportunities for land use and development than we really thought about when we were thinking about SB 50 originally. So it really is an opportunity where we might think differently about land use and development opportunities, particularly on perhaps less intensive sites. And I think that relates to kind of a lot of dialogue on SB 9 and things like that are somewhat controversial right now, but is automation one of the solutions and one of the levers we can pull to address some of the housing issues and the housing crisis? I think we're going to hear from BTA later. I believe, and we have a recent report about this, that particularly there's an opportunity to enhance the infrastructure for handicap accessibility, providing more prioritization of space and coordinating building infrastructure around curbs and ramps that map up to potential automated services are a huge opportunity space. My colleague Anurag Pandey and I just released a report on this from the Meta Transportation Institute, and we'll be talking about that, I believe, in a research snap in December. Lastly, just kind of a laundry list I think that we'll come back to as a part of the rest of our day-to-day, this idea of operational efficiency, fleet partnerships, whether or not we need to be thinking about policies for first responders. Cities, curbside allocation is a big deal. Signs, lines, and potholes, so basic infrastructure, basic sign legibility. And finally, do we think about former auto-serving land uses in our downtown? So we need to really rethink about that. And I say that knowing that, there's this big dialogue in San Francisco about the Nordstrom valet parking lot. And is that really something we want to anchor ourselves to over the long term, preserving legacy parking lots? And I guess that's not the issue at play there, but important to do this. Last but not least, pet project in mind, transportation demand management is a very important link in this, and rethinking how we incentivize shared behavior and also incentivize non-automotive modes is actually really important. So it's really an opportunity for organizations like the TA to not forget that biking, walking ultimately are the most sustainable forms of transportation. So with that said, I have I'd love to maybe I'll stop my share. I have I've done a little work with the Netherlands on this in terms of thinking about behavior change and behavior tactics. And I'd love to see where this goes today. I am very curious about how the TA might reinvent its systems in this new autonomous future. So thank you so much. And hopefully this provides a little framework for us to actually jump into a rich discussion today.
Great, thank you, Billy. Next, we'll have our first panel. So I'd like to introduce Virginia Lingham, who is a senior lead consultant in WSP's management consulting practice, dedicated to helping clients across the US advance strategic technology deployments using innovative techniques, including connected and automated vehicles and other emerging technologies. Ms. Lingham is a licensed professional engineer who holds a BS in industrial engineering from Wayne State University in Detroit and an MS in transportation engineering. Virginia also has a certificate in the management of technology from the University of California, Berkeley. Virginia volunteers as an active committee member with the Transportation Research Board, is a member of ITS America's Smart Infrastructure Standing Committee, and supports WTS, Women Transportation Seminar. And with that, I'll hand it over to Virginia to introduce our first panel.
Great, thank you, Patrick. It's great to be here with everybody today. I'm really excited to introduce this first panel on AV technology and deployment. So I'm going to introduce all of our panelists, and then the panelists will have a chance to share a couple of their slides and then we'll begin kind of more of a discussion with some Q&A and just kind of see where it goes. So first, we have Imran Ali. Imran is a Partner Success Principal at VIA. And in this role, Imran provides strategic guidance on operational and product opportunities to public and private transportation agencies, including AV deployments. Prior to joining VIA, Imran was on the safety and policy team at Zoox and has also worked in the Obama White House. Jose Alvarado is the representative from Cruise. Jose is the Manager of Government Affairs for Cruise. Prior to his current role, he served as Acting Director of International Relations for Speaker Rendon, and also worked with SEIU and as a legislative assistant. Dan Mitchell has worked for Nero for almost 4 years, and including leading the first commercial deployment of a zero occupancy vehicle in Arizona starting in 2018. Prior to joining Nero, Dan co-founded Shepherd, an Uber for Kids child transportation startup in Boston, as well as worked for a variety of political campaigns in federal, state, and local elections. And last but not least, Dr. Mark Rosekind. Mark is a passionate safety professional with more than 30 years of experience promoting innovation through science and leadership in complex environments. Mark joined the executive team of Zoox in April of 2017. Last year, in September of 2020, he was appointed Distinguished Policy Scholar at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And he also served as the 15th administrator for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, from 2014 to 2017. So with that, so as you can see, we have a very experienced and diverse panel here, and let's hear more about what's happening out there. We'll start with you, Imran. I guess, Patrick, if we go to the next slide, Imran can give us a quick update on what's happening at VIA.
Thanks so much, Virginia, and we can go to the next slide. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure virtually meeting you all and to have a discussion about a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I imagine many of you all are as well, about using technology to increase access to transportation. I'm particularly interested in this panel because I lived in Burlingame for a number of years and used to work in Foster City at Zoox with Mark Rosekind prior to joining VIA. I also have my wonderful colleague, Megan Grella, on the line, and she'll be in the breakouts representing VIA. So for those of y'all not familiar with VIA, we were founded with the idea that shared dynamic rides could reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles on our roads. Over the last few years, we have been focused on providing digital transportation infrastructure, supporting on-demand public transit, fixed route, paratransit, and other services for more than 500 public transit agencies around the world. We can go to the next slide. We've also partnered with many innovative organizations, including autonomous vehicle companies and transit agencies, to provide the deployment operation technology for autonomous deployments for 6 live or completed ones, with 3 additional planned to launch within the next year. We've also completed over 20,000 rides across 5 different AV providers and vehicle platforms. And next slide. And I just want to share some of the learnings that we've had from our autonomous deployments. Our goals continue to evolve and focus to ensure that first, AV deployments are useful. We believe that AV deployments should be designed to solve real community transportation needs, including filling transit gaps, focusing on areas with equity considerations, and providing first mile, last mile transit connections. We also continue to focus our efforts on having these rides be shared. Despite COVID considerations around social distancing, we still believe in the long term, AVs will be more accessible and sustainable if they're shared. We also believe that AV deployments should be efficient for operators, for riders, and we do this through our smart algorithms, routing, dispatching, and other tools for all the parties involved with an autonomous vehicle deployment. And finally, autonomous services need to be convenient and safe. VIA develops the customer-facing tools, including in-vehicle screens and access to live customer support to help it build trust in the safety of the autonomous platforms. So ultimately, our goal is fully aligned, I think, with many of you all and the other panelists. We want to help bring autonomous vehicles to solve community transportation needs with a vehicle agnostic platform to make ridership and operations safer, smarter, and exciting. And we're really excited about this conversation to see how we can bring this exciting and impactful technology to San Mateo County soon. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Imran. Look forward to the discussion once we go through the rest of the introductions. So thank you for that. Jose, how are things going at Cruise? Professor Rigg mentioned, there's we're hearing a lot in the news. So tell us a little bit what's going on at Cruise.
Definitely, and can we go to the next slide as well? And yeah, I'll start by thanking Professor Riggs for giving us a shout out. He essentially covered a good part of the presentation, mentioned the origin, that we're the first company to get a driverless deployment from DMV, and we're currently trying to be the first company to get the last permit from the CPUC or driverless deployment as well. But I guess I'll backtrack a little bit. So what is Cruise? So we're a fully autonomous company, fully electric, and we're meant to be shared. We're anchored here in San Francisco, and like a lot of the AVs, we're a managed fleet, so we're not creating vehicles for private ownership. We're trying to create a ride-hail service that's essentially managed to cut back on deadhead miles and just be essentially more efficient than what's out there. And not only are we fully electric here in California, we're also fully renewable. We get our energy from solar farms here in the Central Valley, just outside of Fresno and Tulare. So to borrow a line from the company Beam, Cruise is literally driving in sunshine here in California. And like I mentioned, we're meant to be shared. So we think that's the future of transportation. We want people to essentially not own a vehicle, not drive themselves. We want you to call a Cruise and share it with essentially the public. And if we can go to the next slide. And this is what we call under the hood. This is one of my favorite slides. So our model is the Chevy Bolt, which made by GM, and it looks on the surface like it's just a standard car minus the top head on top. But if you look at it closer, that's essentially the technology that makes this vehicle drive. Like Professor Riggs mentioned, on the level of automation from level 1 to level 5, we're currently at level 4. I think the most advanced technology that's out there. We're fully autonomous, so you can take essentially go call the car in an app, take a nap in the back seat, and wake up when it takes you there. Unlike ADAS and some of the other, self-driving kind of programs where you have to be fully awake and alert at the wheel. And we can go to the next slide. Just very quickly, is a technology that essentially makes the car go. We rely on cameras, on LiDAR, which are little lasers that go on top that kind of map the surrounding. And we also have radar, which kind of senses objects that are moving in a given direction. And this is what makes our vehicles go. Like I mentioned earlier, it's the Chevy Bolt, which is our model, but in the near future, we hope to create this vehicle called the Origin in the GM plant by a fully unionized workforce. That will be our base model, and hopefully that'll be our vehicle going forward. And to be conscious of time, I'll just go very quickly. So we were the first company in California to receive a driverless deployment from DMV, and we're currently applying for the same permit at the CPUC, hoping to get that at some point next year, which will allow us to be out on the streets in the near future without giving a set timeline. And why Cruise? We think, like I mentioned, not only are we fully autonomous, fully electric, we're safer than the human driver, so we'll cut back on accidents and traffic deaths, and we could potentially return mobility to millions and millions of individuals who, for one reason or another, can drive or choose not to drive. And this includes, people with disabilities, people who can't drive due to their age, And, whatever the reason it might be, from a social justice perspective, there's certain people, like in my community where I grew up in Southern California, where people wouldn't drive for one reason or another. And this vehicle will essentially allow them to, call a cab, right? Without worrying about being pulled over or what might come by driving the vehicle yourself. And that's essentially Cruise in a nutshell. We're, in your backyard. We're not in San Mateo just yet, but we're not very far. So, we'll be coming soon.
Great. Thank you, Jose, for that overview of what's happening at Cruise. We'll get into some of the more details in our Q&A. Next up, we have Dan Mitchell with Neuro.
Hi, thanks so much. Great to hear from everyone, and Emily and the folks here at SamTrans. Thanks so much for putting this together. It's really, really, excuse me, important that we have these discussions with stakeholders in the community as we're rolling out this really innovative and exciting technology. If you want to go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about what Neuro is working on. So Neuro's focus is on 3 different core pieces of this autonomous future that we're building. The first is the autonomous technology, making sure we have technology that can safely drive a vehicle with a 360-degree vision, programmed to be a cautious defensive driver, and we can make autonomy decisions focused on safety, not comfort, because we're building a zero-occupant delivery vehicle with our autonomous technology. There is no one inside our vehicle. It is just built for delivery of goods in local neighborhoods. And so we've decided to make it a smaller vehicle that's really focused on protecting what's on the outside rather than what's on the inside of the vehicle. We can always remake a pizza, but it's very, very hard to replace anything, the vulnerable road users on the outside of the vehicle. And so that's why we're taking this autonomous technology and building this novel vehicle with no one inside of it. We're also then going ahead and deploying commercial delivery services that utilize this technology at lower speeds. The zero occupant delivery vehicle is classified as a low speed vehicle. It has a top speed of 25 miles per hour, but it still travels on public roadways and can deliver that magical customer experience of getting the groceries brought right to your curb. Our customers love to utilize this service because it provides a consistent and affordable service in a manner utilizing this technology. On the next slide, I can provide some highlights on kind of what we've done so far. So Neuro is 5 years old now. We've raised over $2 billion in venture capital investment. We're headquartered right nearby in Mountain View, California. And we have commercial partnerships with Kroger grocery stores, Domino's Pizza, FedEx, CVS, Walmart, and stay tuned because there's more to be announced soon. We have also already completed commercial deployments. We've focused on R1 in Scottsdale, Arizona. That was 2018 and 2019 with the first ever zero occupant autonomous vehicle on public roadways in a real commercial service with our grocery partner. That grocery service is now active in Houston, Texas, where we are today doing deliveries with our autonomous vehicles on public roads as part of that commercial service with Kroger grocery stores. And you may have recently seen as well Domino's Pizza's delivery with our R2, our second generation autonomous vehicle that has been deployed on Houston public roadways in that real commercial service. They have a really neat TV ad that they were running over the summer that you should definitely check out as the Neuro vehicle avoids the Noid as it makes its way to deliver pizza. We've also actually done deployments in San Mateo County. As part of the COVID response, working with the county, we identified that at the event center, there was a need to deliver food and medical supplies on a daily basis to folks who are quarantining at the event center location. And so our R2 zero occupant vehicle actually partnered with the county and was driving around that event center, completing completely zero occupant, no one inside of it, and no one actually, or contactless delivery for those at-risk folks as part of that COVID response. There's some great video online of that happening that the county actually produced. Neuro actually has all the California deployment permits it needs for its commercial service. Jose, we were the first actually to get that driverless deployment permit, and we don't need to go through the California CPUC because we don't have people in our vehicle. And so again, please stay tuned for our announcements with new partners and possible delivery services starting in California soon. Finally, I also do want to highlight in Houston, where we have that active grocery delivery service with Kroger, we partnered with Houston Metro, the Houston Transportation Authority, and Texas A&M Transportation Institute to do a research pilot with paratransit users to see if we could replace or deliver a better customer service for some of the paratransit rides to the grocery store. I think we all have seen that those rides can be not just expensive for the transportation department, but also not deliver that magical customer experience that folks in the disability community really deserve. And so we're doing this research pilot to see how our services can help these people that have been often left behind in the transportation technology space. And so we're really excited to have this discussion, welcome questions from the folks about these pilots, and excited to hear more.
Great, thank you, Dan. That's really exciting to hear what's happening at Neuro. Okay, next, Dr. Mark Rosekind with Zoox.
Thanks, Virginia. And what's not on this bio that's a really important context for this discussion is I'm actually a local kid. So third generation San Francisco. I grew up in San Bruno, lived in Foster City. My mother then moved to Millbrae. I've been in Mountain View for decades. So I'm like from San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara County. This is local for me, which is why I really thank Emily for her action. Have a lot of conversations, but it's great to see this happen, because for all of our talk about federal, state, where this stuff is going to happen is in your cities. The rubber meets the road in cities and counties, and these kinds of discussions are absolutely critical for that. So if I can have the next slide, I'm just going to hit 2 points. One is Zoox is going after the big mission, and there's a trifecta here. I want to make sure everybody's got this in their head. That trifecta is looking to enhance safety, mobility, and sustainability for our society. And I'm not going to go into details, but it's part of the job description as the head of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. People need to realize on our roadways, we lose 2021, we lost 38,680 people. That's 100 lives every day. And that's not including all the injuries and all the other horrible things that happen out of crashes. I think people that really care about road safety have zero as their vision of where we should go. And when you look at what new tools do we have, technology is the tool. But besides safety, we have a chance to move people in different ways. And that's critical because a lot of people go right to the disability community, absolutely critical there. But we have a lot of people that have their keys right now to their car and their driver's license that will be using it as they get older. So how do we move more of those people around? And kids. I know people in San Francisco that literally have their kids in 2 different school districts and 1 vehicle or 1 transport mode. And they're having to make decisions how do we handle that? So we have a chance, safety, mobility, and also sustainability. California, once again, leading the way as it talks about having electric vehicles really be the future for autonomous vehicles as well. And so again, just our big view is how do we enhance our society's safety, mobility, and sustainability from the new technology that's available to us. And what you see on here specifically about Zoox is our plan to basically look to the future. What should that look like? And then let's build it now. And so that's why you see that Zoox has built a vehicle from the ground up specifically for autonomy. And the Zoox model is going right to that level 4, level 5, fully autonomous. So there is no steering wheel, there are no brake pedals in this vehicle. It is made for riders. It's intended to be safer, cleaner, so it's all electric, and more enjoyable. And I just did this because, again, what you can't see from the distance, though, is that there's actually carriage seating. This is built for riders, not drivers. And so Zoox is pretty unique in that it's building this from the ground up. It's bi-directional. There is no front or back. So think about that in the city. When you pull into a parking place, when you pull out, you're going forward again. There are no more 3-point turns. There are no more U-turns, essentially. and it's all electric. And I think the last thing I just want to close with so we can get the panel started is what you're hearing that's really important for people in this event to be thinking about is there are timelines you need to consider here. And so what you're seeing is people talking about getting permits, doing demos, starting pilots, et cetera. What all of us really care about is the future when you can walk out your door, open your app, and get the ride that you need for that particular service, right? And that still could be literally 20 to 30 years away. We're going to see more and more in the next couple of years. But you know, that time when you go out and it's right there on your app, pretty much in any city where you've landed, that's still some time away. And the last thing I just want to say what's so great about this meeting is you do want to think ahead. Emily talked about it, 5, 10, 20 years from now, what is your image of what this future should like? And here's your opportunity to learn from all these diverse models and figure out what's going to make a difference on the roads in your city. Looking forward to the panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. So Mark, I'm going to just start off the panel discussion with pivoting from something that you just said. So pivoting off of safety. So again, just to remind everybody, the goal here is to figure out what can San Mateo do next to create their vision for automated vehicles in the future. So safety is clearly a key goal. We want the community to be safe and secure and have trust in the vehicles that are going to be on the road, both as a passenger and in their interactions on the roadway. So let's talk about what can San Mateo County do to help improve the safety within the vehicles that you have on the road.
So great place to start. And let me just highlight, you know, yesterday, talk about groundbreaking, right? The president signed an infrastructure bill, and we should probably just start there. Billy mentioned it in, you know, the keynote, and that is what's interesting is for most of the technologies we're talking about, improving infrastructure, just like you would for humans, should make it better for these new technologies. So a lot of people are concerned about, you know, is there a heavy lift or a lot of money involved in improving infrastructure? And frankly, if you just make sure the paint is clear, the signs are working, right, that the electronics of the light signals, et cetera, are functioning appropriately and reliable, if you do that, you're really setting the foundation that you need for the technology that's coming. And the other part I'll just mention for safety, and boy, does this sound strange, but remember, as a former head of NHTSA, I always tell local government, city, county, even state, it's really helpful for people to look at your authorities, right? So, you know, what kind of things do you have available if you need to sort of help manage some of these things on your streets? Not waiting for the feds, not waiting for the state, but what are the kinds of things that you have available? So you've got some very concrete things you control, like the infrastructure, and then other things you can think about. How do we help that safety by knowing what our authorities are to help manage that on our city streets?
Thanks, Mark. Jose, would you like to, what can the infrastructure side do, or what can the cities and counties do to help improve safety at cruise?
No, definitely. It's kind of what Mark said, right? Having everything clearly defined, so we have to map the streets and kind of essentially create our own maps of where cars can and can't drive. So knowing where a bus stop is, where a taxi stop is, where we can go, right? The slow streets. But also we are a fully electric company, so the infrastructure to support that type of fleet and bring this into a new market or allow us to kind of move there is very important.
Okay, thanks. Imran or Dan, do you have anything more you'd like to add about safety?
Yeah, I can hop in really quickly. I'll be plagiarizing Mark a little bit. When we were at Zooks, we often talked about the aviation industry and how important it was. You know, if any single player had an AV crash, it impacts, or an airplane crash, it impacts the entire industry. Same will apply for the AV industry, and ultimately this, you know, our engineers are working on, you know, deploying technological solutions to make sure that AV deployments are safe, but ultimately we need to also be focused on building trust with the end rider. So that's something that we've been very focused on at VIA, given that we are the customer facing tool, and you know, this includes customer education efforts by AV companies, but also actual ways for individuals to communicate with live humans or, you know, first responders and other individuals to make sure that they feel like when they get picked up, to the time that they get dropped off, they feel safe, and not to mention that other community members driving around these vehicles also feel safe interacting with these vehicles.
Yeah, I'll pick up on what Imran had said there, as well as add on that it's not just about the safety of our vehicles, but it's about the safety of the community as a whole. And one of the things that we work very closely with local governments on is education of neighborhoods on where these autonomous vehicles are testing or operating, because we want the whole community to be safe interacting with these vehicles. And so, as there are opportunities, as these vehicles start to roll out and test in neighborhoods and on the city streets in these areas, we really rely on the city council, as well as the public information offices, to really help us get the right information out there about what these vehicles are doing and who they can contact at these companies that are doing the testing if folks in the community want to follow up on with more information. And so that's something where we really do need to partner to get that right information out to folks in the community.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys went there. I think that's so important. Building the trust, well, first of all, designing a solid customer experience and the user interface that the passengers or users of the vehicles will be able to understand and follow and trust, but then also working with local communities to help get the word out about what to expect and what to do, not just being surprised when they see something on the road. Maybe could you share a little bit about what you've done in other cities to get the word out and maybe partner with others, as well as I also wanted to touch on incident management or partnering with others like emergency response community, law enforcement, those types of things?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the lead and follow up on this. So the first thing that we do when Neuro comes into a new city is reach out to those city leaders, mayors, city council, city managers' offices, to really get the feedback, understand what the local context is and what's happening. And we've been really lucky. We've already completed a number of demos for city council members in San Mateo County, and we're happy to continue to do that as well. But we also go and conduct our own neighborhood and community outreach. There's a lot of great community events and festivals that are happening now, that are coming back now outdoors. And so, one example, pre-pandemic, the Mountain View Art and Wine Festival attracts over 100,000 people from our surrounding neighborhoods and areas. And so at that event, right next to the NASA table and booth there, kids could actually see our vehicles, interact with staff, interact with the vehicles that we had on display there at those community events. And so, as there are more community events, we'd love to be invited to participate in some of those things. Yeah, again, the kids really love seeing these vehicles, but it's a great way to interact with the neighbors. On the law enforcement side, we've really seen that the most successful partnerships have come from when law enforcement agencies have a dedicated person within their department to interact with technology companies that are operating in their area, because we don't necessarily know for each police department or fire department, who the right folks to contact are. Each one, depending on the size of the city, is structured a little bit differently. And so the ones that we've seen most success with are the ones that have a dedicated person that can take the information from Neuro and make sure it's disseminated within the police department or fire department. It's actually something that the Governor's Highway Safety Administration has recommended in their report on autonomous technology interactions with first responders. And that's something maybe I'll share a link to as well if other cities are interested in some of their recommendations for how first responders can interact with automated vehicles.
Great, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I agree. Having that point person, just knowing who to talk to within the agency or within different departments is super important. Mark, I see you unmuted.
Well, I just, two things. One is, before NHTSA, I was a board member at the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, for 5 years. So, that's the premier agency that looks at major crashes in all modes across the country. And I say that because I think it's really critical that, each company has a robust incident response plan in place. But what you just highlighted is that can't just stay within the company, right? So this is something the county needs to think about, which is, not just checking it, but what is our interaction and requirements for us to actually be working with, these companies that are operating or deployed actually on our streets. And I say that because I don't have to tell all of you, the most critical thing in incident response has to do with lessons learned. Do you actually get to what the probable cause is and make sure that whatever you learn gets basically promulgated across everything? There's something, sorry, this is going to take an extra moment, which is, I always call this never again. If someone gets killed in a circumstance related to an incident of technology, that information needs to be shared across the industry, across cities, counties, states, etc. Never again, right? Everyone should be able to figure out, okay, there was a problem there. How do we fix it? You shouldn't need every company to go through that experience to say, oh, now we have the data, we can fix it. Never again. There should be one. And so again, I think this is so critical here because, as cities and counties, you can share that information, and I would just say that for some of the permits, California, again, leading the way, there is a requirement for a law enforcement interaction plan. And the Governor Highway Safety Association has put out some recommendations for that. But, what's really critical is, what do you need, right? This is my comment about what do you need. And I don't talk about this very often, but this is local for me. My father was a San Francisco police officer. He was killed in the line of duty. I was 3.5. My brother was 2. He was chasing a traffic violator and somebody ran a red light or read something, killed him when he got hit. This is personal for me. And everybody I bet on this call has a story. It's touched you. If it's not your family, it's your friends. And I always tell people, this is why at Zooks in particular, for me, law enforcement is always critical, first responders. And for all respect to the politicians here, when you go into a city, the first responders are going to be there. The cops, the firefighters, the EMT, with a lot of other folks come and go. The first people on the scene that have to deal with what's going on are those first responders. So it's way more than just respect. It's everything we can do to make sure they're educated, plans are clear, and that we're supporting whatever they're going to need to help this technology. If we ever expect to make our streets safer, more mobility for people and greater sustainability, we need them as an integral part of that program.
So one of the things that I work a little bit more on the connected vehicle side of things, so the infrastructure side of the house. And, one of the major things that we try to promote there is the importance of connectivity to enable safety applications within vehicles. So we actually have a question here in the chat too, but do any of your vehicles have a level of connectivity that works with your safety systems? Or do you see that as like a future phase that infrastructure could provide information such as signal information or other information that it has about work zones or other things? Is that information useful to your systems today, or are you planning for that in the future? Maybe we could start with Cruz.
Both season now and full season for the future. Obviously, having a real-time knowledge of, when there's anything that changes in the road, so we can upload it and all our vehicles have it instantly. It's obviously something we're very excited about trying to get to that point. And also to go back to the law enforcement piece, if there is an incident, try to share data as quickly as possible, fully transparent, right? And trying to do it in the most kind of immediate and safe way possible. But as far as the infrastructure piece, kind of what everyone's touched upon, technology is changing quickly. We constantly get software support. So there are a number of options we're looking at, and it's hard to say where we'll be in 2-3 years down the line, but it's definitely an important piece of what we do, we're trying to do.
Okay, Imran, do you have anything to add on either topic?
Yeah, I do think that I've got 2 thoughts here. First, I think that autonomous vehicles need to be developed in a way that they can be deployed safely in a community without the community's a massive investment or infrastructure changes, right? I think that AV communities have a responsibility to develop technology that can operate in the real world. And I think, as we know, they can't be as reliant upon third-party infrastructure sources or data sources, given that there are sometimes lags. At the same time, the VIA's value add here is really around routing and making sure that we operate in the real world, right? We already have hundreds of deployments around the world, and we already work with cities like the city of San Francisco to have an understanding of what streets need to be closed when. This is for safety. You know, when I was visiting Las Vegas, the first responders often brought up, you know, the mass casualty incident and how they really wanted to be able to communicate with local transportation providers to say, please avoid this area, or please have folks come up, pick up, you know, civilians that need to be moved away. And for us to be able to work directly with city transit agencies and law enforcement to be able to mitigate against these safety incidents and traffic, I think is something that we can do now, and something that we will continue to work with AV partners on to make sure that vehicles get around communities safely and efficiently.
Great, thank you. So shifting gears here, and we'll have more time to dive into these details in our breakouts if there are questions or additional things that you'd like to share. But shifting gears here, the one thing I noticed that was in common between all of your AVs and the solutions that you're offering is that they're shared. So as far as the context of shared vehicles, shared services, I mean, the pandemic that we're currently going through, how has that affected your vision for the future, or your model, or kind of your game plan as your product has been, you know, being developed, as your tools have been evolving? What are your thoughts on the future of shared?
I'll just start us by just saying it hasn't changed our thinking about it very much. You know, you want to change congestion in cities, it's all about shared. And I don't mind telling you, having worked a lot with the airline industry, while people are still wondering about travel, it's not the airplanes. You know, I mean, they've figured out a lot on how to protect us on those airplanes. And I think we're going to see the same thing in rideshare. And so again, I think as a model to really look at how we're going to decrease congestion and increase mobility for cities, rideshare will be there. And by the way, you can still order any one of these and get a single ride, right? Be the individual in that carriage if you want to be. So I think that's still available if people choose that. But I think the future will still be rideshare as we sort of get beyond our most immediate concerns regarding the pandemic.
Yeah, if I can jump in. I don't think our mission changed at all. If anything, I think it kind of showed us new ways we can kind of help and be useful. For instance, in March, we kind of started this partnership with SM Marine Food Bank, and we were delivering meals since there was such a shortage of workers. And up to this point, we deliver almost 2 million meals in San Francisco, 80% to low-income zip codes. And like Mark mentioned, I don't think it's you know, you can still take the vehicle itself, and currently, you know, there's no one in the vehicle, so you don't have to worry about being exposed. You know, the driver might be sick, or you know, the previous passenger maybe had something, right? And not only are we, you know, fully autonomous, but we're centralized for a managed fleet, so we can kind of control the way these vehicles are deployed a lot better than, you know, an Uber or a Lyft.
I completely agree. I think Mark and Jose hit the nail on the head. These we have to move to a shared platform. We will not be able to reduce congestion, greenhouse gas emissions, and just single occupancy in vehicles without moving towards a more shared platform. And I think what's critical is, you know, the way the areas that VIA's focused on are, you know, these transportation deserts, places where there aren't buses or rail lines to pick up these folks, and we can't continue having single occupancy vehicles, you know, take them to either first mile, last mile, or even, you know, busy corridors like, you know, downtown San Francisco. We need to find ways to have, you know, dynamic shared resources, and we work directly with public transit agencies to identify these locations to create these flexible platforms. And you know, I think what's really exciting is, you know, we've also worked with city of LA County to use the same exact software services that we use for our shared rides to do emergency food and grocery deliveries. So, you know, we need to be focused on these flexible platforms to really respond to what the community needs at any given time.
And Dan, how are you guys planning for shared? I mean, because you're shared delivery.
Yeah, so with the delivery services, you can batch trips. Like, you know, we can pick up from Domino's Pizza, you know, 4 orders from a customer and drop it off at 4 different places. But we could also, based on how we're building out our commercial delivery model, pick up from 4 different stores for one person's delivery. And so there's a couple ways to do that. The only way that works though is if we run these commercial pilots to get the learnings about how customers are interacting, how each business, what we need to do for a local dry cleaner might be different than a nationwide grocery chain. And so running these commercial pilots as we're working on the software technology development, as we're creating these novel vehicle designs, is all really important to do in parallel. And so we've been really lucky that we've been able to run these commercial pilots in our different deployment areas already. And we'll continue to do that over the next couple of years to get those learnings to make sure that these vehicles are doing something really useful for people in the community. You can build a really, really cool technology, but if it's not useful for anyone, you're probably building the wrong thing. And we really want to make sure that this is useful for folks in the community.
Right. True innovation is really meeting market need, not just the technology for the technology's sake. And I think it's clear here we have a strong market need, but aligning that with how the customers are going to use it and the individual community needs is so important. So we have a couple questions here in the chat. I'm just going to read it here. So can you elaborate more on the idea of cities identifying backbone routes for AVs and balancing for first and last mile solutions that will put people exactly where they need to go? So how do we use these, along key routes to go to Caltrain or to go to mobility hubs or, other things that the county is planning?
So Virginia, thanks for making sure we read that question, because Emily brings up something core, especially to public transit, and just a quick way to get the conversation going. I actually think one of the most important things that cities and counties can do is get a task force or a working group together and create a strategic plan. You already said it, 5, 10, 20 years, what should this look like? And key to that is how you both complement with an E and supplement all your current public transit. Everybody thinks there's going to be a big fight here. There shouldn't be. And so you need to figure out the pilots for that first and last mile. Another one we heard from San Francisco is shift workers in the middle of the night, right? A lot of service operators. I don't want to run a bus for 4 people at 4 o'clock in the morning. What do I do? Well, that's a supplement. And so again, I think rather than ask necessarily all the companies, I think you should start with your strategic plan to identify where your needs are. And then the question is, how do you help us fulfill that need? And see, who's out there that can actually help you get that done from a strategic long-term view.
So sharing the needs with you guys, and then working with you to identify like how your technologies can help serve the specific needs of the community. Anyone else have anything to add about that? Are there would dedicated lanes be helpful for your AVs or anything like that?
I can address that as well. The only thing I was going to add is completely agree with Mark. Ultimately, no company wants to come in and put their vehicles down somewhere that the community doesn't want it, right? It needs to solve an existing need and be supported by the communities. And that's what VIA has done. Our service is around putting in these microtransit on-demand vans that are geofenced, right? They're not necessarily geofenced the way an autonomous vehicle is. And ultimately, we need to figure out the capabilities of the autonomous vehicle, like can it operate in a certain area, but really identify, and there are plenty of tools out there, and we have tools to run simulations on if you deployed 6 vehicles here, how many rides can you actually be picked up? We have tools like Remix, a company that's based in San Francisco that VIA recently acquired, that actually overlays a community's public transit and can see, how far is the closest stop? Are these low-income communities? Are these elderly communities? Are there a higher proportion of folks that need wheelchair accessible vehicles in a certain area, and really design the service around meeting the community's needs? And this shouldn't be just any transportation company deciding this for a community. I think we really need to work in tangent with the communities to deploy that, and then make sure that we communicate with riders on an ongoing basis through surveys and feedback, and make sure that we are expanding or contracting the zones accordingly.
Okay, well, we're about out of time, so I just want to thank you for all of your contributions in this panel today. I think we've made it clear that that AVs are going to complement transit service, that they're going to need to remain shared services in order to meet the mobility demands of the community. You know, that safety is of paramount importance. And yeah, so thank you so much for sharing all of the information about what you're doing with AVs. I think we're going to transition over to our next panel now. So, and again, we'll have breakouts where we can ask more specific questions with different panel members after our panel sessions. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. So panel number 2 is focused on public sector pilots and deployments. So what's happening in the field from the public agency perspective? We have Adam Berger, who is a senior transportation planner at Valley Transportation Authority, or VTA, and he has recently taken on the caretaker role of VTA's innovation program following the retirement of Chief Innovation Officer Gary Miskell, which some of you may have worked with in the past. So Adam leads the planning efforts for bus transit infrastructure projects and led the redesign of VTA's transit network. We also have on our panel today Peter Calcaterra. Peter is a senior transportation planner at the Connecticut Department of Transportation in the Office of Strategic Planning and Projects. Over the past 5 years, Peter has led Connecticut DOT's efforts to prepare for connected and automated vehicles and currently heads their CAV program. Peter was the author of Connecticut DOT's first ever statewide strategic plan for connected automated vehicles, published in February of this year. And he serves as the technology and policy lead of the Connecticut Fast Track Automated Bus Project, which is the first in the nation project to deploy full-size automated, connected, and electric buses in revenue service. So welcome, Peter. Jack Hall is with us today too. Jack is the ITS and Connected Vehicle, Automated Vehicle Program Manager for Contra Costa Transportation Authority. Jack provides project management for CCTA projects, assists local agencies with the delivery of their Measure J projects, and helps manage implementations of intelligent transportation systems across Contra Costa. He has 26 years of experience and is a professional engineer, and also served 9 years in the US Air Force. And last but not least, Shana Quinn. Shana is a program manager in Utah Transit Authority's Office of Innovative Mobility Solutions, which is focused on testing connected and automated vehicles and other on-demand services. And Shana's been with UTA for over 15 years. So this is our panel here. Kind of similar to the last panel, we're going to give each panel member a few minutes to kind of introduce themselves and some of their key projects that they're working on. So Adam, could you start us off?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Adam Berger, Senior Transportation Planner at VTA. And I must say, I feel like a little bit of an outsider here in such a technically savvy group. My day-to-day work at VTA is more focused around making transit work better for the public, thinking about how we can meet our climate change goals, our mode shift goals, reduce VMT, things like street design. And so that puts me a little at odds with my team, which is very much focused on the technology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 things we're pursuing. The first is our Avtar shuttle, which you see here. This is a shuttle that would operate at the Palo Alto Veteran Affairs Hospital. It would be all on private roads, which makes the whole permitting process a lot easier. The shuttle is the Local Motors Ollie shuttle, and it would have a level 4 AV kit on board. We would have a human driver just to make sure that nothing goes wrong, or if the vehicle gets stuck or needs some help, that person can intervene. And we're planning on operating this service in the second quarter of 2022. Next slide. Second effort we're working on is a collaboration between VTA and the Western Reserve Transit Authority in Youngstown, Ohio. On this effort, both agencies are coming together to purchase a vehicle that would be a van-sized vehicle that would operate a fixed route service. This would also have level 4 AV kit and a human driver on board. And the first year of operation would happen in Youngstown, Ohio. And so after about a year, it would come over to VTA. I see I've got a typo there. We would hope to have our service up and running in quarter 3 of 2023. And this service would operate between the VA hospital as well as the Palo Alto Transit Center cutting through Stanford University. And the third thing we're working on is we're currently pursuing grant funding for this, but we're trying to look at what sort of onboard systems are needed to replicate some of the features that a bus driver provides. Now, we're a public transit agency. Everything we do needs to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And there are so many things that come to meeting that responsibility that are currently the responsibility of the driver. And so we're going to try to get funding to test a few of those things on both of these shuttles. One would be external camera systems that can determine if there is somebody waiting at a bus stop, if that person will need to have the ramp deployed, say if they're in a wheelchair or a mobility assisted device, as well as some onboard systems, voice recognition technology, kind of like Alexa, that will allow the riders to communicate with somebody to get answers, whether automated or person, as well as potentially onboard camera systems that can determine if something has gone wrong inside the vehicle. Is a passenger having a medical issue or something that's going to require outside help? You know, if transit agencies can get to a point where autonomous vehicles are a reality, it could really shift what we're able to provide. About 80% of what the cost of operating transit comes from labor, with the big majority of that being driver labor. If transit agencies no longer needed drivers, they could provide vastly more service. They could do it for much longer hours, more cost efficiently. But there's enormous questions there about whether we'll be comfortable getting to that point. So we're trying to do a little bit of work testing those things out, and we'll see where it goes. So that's it for me. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Adam, for that introduction. Okay, Pete with Connecticut DOT. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks from the East Coast perspective. How are things going over in Connecticut? Let's see. Not muted. Pete, are you there? Okay, maybe we can come back to Pete. Let's keep going. We'll move over to Jack. And Jack, or Pete, if you get back online, just shoot me a note. We'll loop back to you after this. All right, Jack, over also in the Bay Area. I hope everybody knows where Contra Costa is, but you have a lot going on with connected and automated vehicles.
Okay,
give us an update.
Thank you, Virginia. So again, my name is Jack Hall. I'm the ITS Connected Autonomous Vehicle Program Manager here at Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And we got involved with AV technology mainly to increase safety. As people have mentioned earlier, other panelists, connected autonomous cars can't hit each other or pedestrians or bicycles. So that's our main goal. We also want to try to reduce congestion. We're a congestion management agency. And with that, we will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And also we want to bring jobs out to Contra Costa. There's quite a big jobs housing imbalance. So this slide talks about a few of our projects that we're working on. We started off with shared autonomous vehicles. Our very first vehicle was an Easy Mile shuttle built by Ligier Motors in France, but we have since transitioned to the Ollie shuttle, which is an American-made local motors shuttle, and you can see that in the top left. We've also received a couple US DOT grants. The top middle is our Mobility on Demand grant, or you could be called Mobility as a Service, which was mentioned earlier today too. And that basically will give you an app on your phone. It'll take you from your origin to your destination across multiple modes, and you'll have one payment. The third project on the top right is our Automated Driving System grant. This was a very competitive grant application with US DOT. There were 73 applications and 8 awardees, and they were all either state DOTs or universities, so we were a local agency there. This project consists of 3 different projects. One is the Rossmore First Mile, Last Mile project. It's an active adult community that's gated in Walnut Creek, California. And there's an existing shuttle route, and what we're going to do is supplement that with the Ollie shuttle, and hopefully it can operate at longer hours and help people get to their destination, such as the community center or the gym. The second project in this grant is the county hospital project. We're working with one of our local transit agencies, County Connection. They have an existing paratransit system, and we're going to supplement that with an AV vehicle. And hopefully we can get people to the hospital so they don't miss appointments, and it become more vital so they don't have to have an emergency 911 call. And this vehicle will also have an automated docking system for wheelchairs. And then the third project in this grant is the personal mobility on Interstate 680. And we're using autonomous vehicles to see if we can increase capacity on the freeway, because we don't feel we can build our way out of congestion, and we feel like technology is the way to go. Bottom left is Gomentum Station. That was mentioned, I think, earlier today too. It's the Concord Naval Weapons Station that was closed in 2006. And it's got, it's basically a city that's vacant. So we have many AV companies test at this facility. It was so successful that we brought in a managing partner, AAA, to help us manage it. We're a small agency of 20 people. Currently, we have 16. And so we needed someone to help. And AAA's vision mirrors ours about safety, mainly on safety, but also congestion relief and helping people get to their destinations. At Gomentum Station, we also have what's called our V2X Signal Lab. Here we have different vendors come in with their traffic controllers, and then the different private partners test with their cars and their onboard units, so they can go through different intersections with different controllers and make sure that they can communicate with each other in a secure environment. We actually did test in San Ramon on public streets with our Easy Mile shuttle, and you run into some issues, so it's better to try to work them out in the private arena or in the secure environment. And on the bottom right there is our dynamic personal mobility microtransit. So here we work with different companies to try to bring new technology. And the company is Glideways, and they run on a dedicated right-of-way, and they have a proof of concept site at Gomentum, and they're currently enlarging that. Next slide, please. So this is some of the where we're going, some of the trends, and I'll just go over a couple of the bigger ones. So we are currently working on expanding our program to include drones. And so with that, we're working with Contra Costa County. There's two airports here, the Byron Airport and the Buchanan Airport. And we're going to expand our program to include drones. We just got back from the ITS World Congress in Hamburg, Germany, and drones were a big player at that conference. And also at the county, we're working on developing a first responder AV training center where first responders can work and interact with AVs. So that is my overview, and thank you, Virginia.
Thank you, Jack. All right, Shayna from Utah Transit Authority.
Thanks, Virginia. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shayna Quinn. I work for UTA based in Salt Lake City, Utah. The transit that we provide serves about 80% of the state of Utah, from the city of Ogden through Salt Lake and down to Provo. So in the last couple of years, we've been participating on a shuttle pilot. This is Utah's first experience, so statewide, with a level 4, so fully self-driving, low-speed automated vehicle. And the pilot was a public-private partnership between UTA and the UDOT Department of Transportation. And then we had the private partnership of the shuttle provider and operator, Easy Mile, and WSP also supported us by providing some best practices, some planning assistance, and also on the final report. The shuttle pilot operated over 16 months in 8 different locations. It was a bit of a demonstration project that was also a road show, every place from the state capitol like this, literally the steps of the state capitol, down to St. George in a convention center that's in southern Utah, up to a Park City mountain resort, and university campuses, business parks, lots of different settings, and in 4 seasons. So we were looking at understanding what are the capabilities and limits of this type of technology. We're looking to build awareness in our state that this technology exists, and it's time to start planning for it now so that we are prepared for the future of transportation. Some of the key learnings were 94% of the people who boarded the shuttle, this was their first opportunity to ride in an autonomous vehicle. So again, it's just demonstrating that this is real, and we can start to plan around it. The vehicle itself, I'd consider this a niche platform. It is very reliable and safe in a tightly controlled operational design domain with 0 obstacles. So very, good at staying on its trajectory. However, that was not representative of a lot of the public transit use cases that we have, even when testing first and last mile situations. The vehicle was able to drive autonomously 98% of the time, which really sounds like a lot, but in reality, that means that the onboard human attendant was doing 2% of the maneuvering of the vehicle using a joystick type of device. However, this was our first step, and we're thinking big. We see the potential to complement public transit, as do the riders. So 98% of the people on board told us that they saw this as a viable option for complementing our trains and buses. And that's how we're looking at expanding testing in a second phase project. So the types of use cases that we see opportunity with, we call automated and accessible microtransit. UTA does operate a 70-mile square zone geofenced microtransit service area right now in southern Salt Lake County. We see some potential to kind of build a nested geofence, smaller, simpler, fully automated microtransit service and layer on top of our existing service. And the customer benefit there is, of course, a self-driving vehicle in this situation is never going to make a wrong turn. It's always going to follow the GPS. It gives the human operator, there's still going to be a driver on board, of course, because that's what the service provides. It's a vehicle and a driver, but it gives the customer more opportunity to interact with that driver and still have, all of the assistance for our ADA customers. The other potential application is around bus rapid transit. And we see 2 potential ways to apply highly automated systems in this space. One is to upfit an existing BRT vehicle. So full size, full speed, 40-foot bus, taking it from say a level 0 automation to up to a level 3, where the driver is being assisted with precision docking or lane centering, for better on-time performance, for better safety for the vehicle, for the infrastructure that surrounds those stations. The other opportunity around BRT is actually utilizing, similar to what's going on in Connecticut, a dedicated corridor. So there are opportunities to extend a light rail route or line on a dedicated path. And so that vehicle could be a level 4 bus, potentially operating fully self-driving for a portion of that route. And I'll hand it back to you. Thanks, Virginia.
And there's a photo of the vehicle and the pilot. Okay, and then I think we have Pete back on the line. So maybe if we could switch back to his slide. Pete, are you able to unmute? Looks like you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there we go. Great.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure what happened here. Is there an echo too?
I'm not hearing an echo. You're good.
All right, good. All right. So thank you very much for having me speak today. I'll go to the next slide here because I think Virginia went to the bio. So I'm going to provide just a brief overview of our automated bus operations project. on CT Fast Track. Gina kind of gave a good precursor to it on her talk there. In that we'll be operating a highly automated bus on CT Fast Track. Brief background about CT Fast Track first is that public transportation in Connecticut is predominantly led by, at the state level, Connecticut DOT. We don't have large cities that absorb transit as part of their operations, so the state handles that. Heavily fund and operate transit as a state function. The guideway that we have in Connecticut, CT Fast Track Fixed Guideway, was a nearly $600 million investment that took place about 5 or 6 years ago. It's about 9.4 mile road. It's a bus only road. Buses are the only vehicles allowed on the road. There's about 10 stations on the guideway, 5 intersections. I'll go through that really briefly here. We run during peak hours. We have service on the guideway where buses run every few minutes, 5 to 7 minutes during peak hour, and then 15 minutes during off peak hour. But there's a bunch of buses that come on and off the guideway at different points. We have a mix of operations on the guideway as well as around downtown Hartford. So the guideway itself connects 2 mid-sized cities in central Connecticut, the capital city of Hartford, and another nearby city, New Britain. There are a mix of fleet on the guideway now, ranging from vehicles as small as 30-foot local route transit buses all the way up to 60-foot articulated buses. The bus that we're going to be automating will be a 40-foot bus. Also a range of speeds on the guideway too, ranging from 20 miles an hour to 45 miles an hour. In fact, the speed limits actually changed 19 times in each direction. So I'm giving these points here because these are all things that the automated driving system needs to interact with in terms of the operational design domain. Each station on the guideway is equipped with raised platforms, crosswalks, real-time signage, ticket vending machines. And as I mentioned, there's 5 at-grade crossings, 2 of which are adjacent to a live active rail line here in central Connecticut. So we have this state-of-the-art facility that was built, like I mentioned, about 5 or 6 years ago. And we really see it as a great opportunity to bring new technologies to it and to automate service. So as part of our vision, we ended up applying for a federal IMI grant back in 2019. We're successful in winning the grant, partnering with New Flyer, one of the largest bus manufacturers in North America, and robotic research, working with CTE and the University of Connecticut. The funds, part of the funds that come from the project come from Federal Transit Administration. We're also working with US DOT Volpe on the project as well. The actual tasks of driving that will occur in automation mode, so to speak, on the guideway include things like lane keeping, pedestrian object detection, steering, braking, as well as precision docking and platooning. Those are some focus areas of the operations. We will have a safety driver on board able to take over at any point if needed, but we're working very hard with our automated driving system developer to make sure when the bus is in quote unquote automation mode, it remains and stays in automation mode. It will be able to achieve speeds up to 40 miles an hour, which is somewhat of a difference of some of the local shuttles that may be deployed in other locations around the US and around the world that go on average about 8 to 15 miles an hour, perhaps. So be able to go to about 40 miles an hour. And the bus will be manually driven in downtown Hartford. As I mentioned, precision docking is one of the focal points of the project, trying to make sure that, because we do have level boarding at each of the stations, the platforms are all raised, just like at a rail station. You don't think twice when you step onto a train that you're going to fall through the gap, so to speak. We want to make sure that the bus is able to get right up close to the edge of the platform so that folks can get on, especially folks that are boarding with the wheelchair. The buses continue to be ADA accessible. Some of our stations have tough geometries, and our drivers do a phenomenal job getting in and out of those stations, but sometimes the bus does hit the platform, and the platform usually wins in that case, or the bus doesn't approach too close enough to the platform so that a bridge plate needs to be deployed. So these are things that we want to avoid and try to achieve successfully with automation to avoid that, getting close to the platform. The other aspect of the project we're looking to do for automation is platooning. Maybe not so much what you may think about typically with platooning, where maybe a focus more on throughput. But this is really about, in the future, not buying 60-foot articulated buses to run during peak hours anymore, but really replacing that service with two 40-foot buses or two 30-foot buses that would operate in tandem and provide the same or level better of service during peak hour and be able to break apart during off-peak hours to improve headways along the guideway and other routes, or go back to our transit facility. We're an agency that's fully committed to transitioning our entire transit fleet to fully battery electric buses. So we're right now upgrading all of our transit facilities around the state to properly install electric bus charging infrastructure and making all the various preparations for transitioning our entire fleet to fully battery electric. And these buses that we're going to be deploying as part of this project are fully battery electric buses. We're also making intersection improvements at each of the 5 intersections along the guideway. The technology that's traveling through the intersections does require connectivity to the intersection in order to remain autonomous through the intersection. So we are upgrading all the traffic signal controller equipment and installing roadside units at each of the intersections and onboard units on each of the buses to enable connected vehicle communications, which basically helps to improve reliability and safety through the intersections. We are partnering with US DOT Volpe, as I had mentioned, as part of the project. They're working with us on some human factors research that will be deploying as part of the driver training and in parallel to the operations of the bus. We are also working with University of Connecticut to do a bus perception and adoption survey of the safety drivers and any and all passengers that get on board our buses, kind of a before and after scenario to identify folks' perceptions of the technology, how it changes perhaps before they experience it and after they experience it. The timeline of the project right now, we're still in the design build phase of the project. The buses will be brought to Connecticut in late 2022 and will be operational on revenue service in 2023. And the total cost of the project is about $11 million, which we are funding from a variety of different sources, federal. As I mentioned, an IMI grant. We also were successful in getting an FTA Low-No grant, and we've been matching it, enhancing the project with other federal and state funds. So that's a summary on that project. Happy to answer any questions on the project or other things related to automation I'm involved with. So thank you, Virginia.
Great, thank you, Pete. And thank you all for sharing your brief updates about some of the projects that you're working on. I feel like we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here. We just have a few minutes to do these introductions, but again, we'll have more time to dig into the details a little bit in the breakouts. So I guess for each of you, the panel members, I'd like to know more about how your agency or how you go about identifying the technologies and the technologies or providers to use. How do you select that? Is it the partnerships? Is it leadership? Is it going after grant opportunities? Like, how do you plan and create your vision? How have you done that in the past? Maybe we'll start from the top. Adam, would you mind going first?
Sure. I think VTA is in a lucky situation. We're here in Silicon Valley, where there's so much innovation going on with automated vehicles. And my predecessor, Gary Miskell, really did a good job of getting in the middle of all that, making a lot of connections with other industry groups, with groups like Prospect Silicon Valley that help link up companies with agencies. And I think we're really in a good space here because we have agencies that want to, or companies that want to prove the viability of their technology. And so they're interested in partnering with us in ways that really reduce the costs if VTA were to try to take on this initiative on its own. And we're able to do a lot of short-term pilots that way. So my advice, I guess, would be to have your agency just have a strong position on innovation on autonomous technology, that it's something you want to explore, and then let your staff get right into the middle of these discussions, make those connections, and then opportunities come up. And it's worked well for us.
I would just echo that. In my previous role as Connected Automated Vehicles Program Manager for Virginia Department of Transportation, I just found that going around having those listening sessions and hearing what the staff, their ideas, what their ideas are, and getting them to think about automated vehicles, it just spurs so many things, and they just want the chance to kind of talk about it. They actually they do know a lot and have ideas on how it can impact their work or come up with solutions. Okay, maybe Pete, do you want to go next? How do you
Sure.
identify technology and providers?
Yeah, absolutely. I have the pleasure of working at an agency that has a very forward-thinking view on public transportation, evident of the fact that we invested $600 million into a bus rapid transit corridor 5 or 6 years ago, and run transit at a statewide level here in Connecticut, and are fully invested in transitioning our fleet to a fully battery electric fleet. So, engaging in automated technologies is kind of another opportunity for us to kind of be forward thinking on how we deploy public transportation here in the state. So, we before we started this project, we did canvass all the different automated all the major bus manufacturers across North America to assess who we wanted to work with, and did land on New Flyer as that partnership. And again, as I mentioned, we're successful in the grant application. I think the grant application helped spearhead this and get this going. If we did not get the grant, I think it would be a steeper hill to climb for us, at least on the automation side. It definitely has made it easier for us to justify our investments in this. So, and we'll continue to invest in grant applications. We do so regularly for buying buses, and especially transitioning our fleet to electric. So I think grant applications help, and being successful in those help as well. So it's kind of a business that we will continue to deploy. We also created a CAV statewide strategic plan that also helps to reinforce those decisions and to keep them going. And we're going to continue to kind of build out our efforts within the agency to support our involvement with CAV. So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. I would say that we have a pretty forward-thinking leadership within the agency, and a culture that really supports public transportation.
Awesome. Thank you, Pete. Yeah, that culture, just having that culture for innovation. I think that we see that within all of the agencies that we have here. So I think that's really important. Jack, how do you identify the technologies and providers that you're using?
Sure. So, I mean, our board, again, is very supportive of innovation and new technology. Also, having a test bed, Momentum Station, in its proximity to Silicon Valley is definitely a benefit. In fact, most of the technology providers in Silicon Valley, they reach out to us because they want to test at Momentum Station. They don't want to travel to Arizona or Michigan, and they prefer to be close by. So pretty much we take phone calls, and then we work with everybody if they want to test. So it's been fairly productive, and I think the test bed is our main benefit, again, along with our board being very supportive of innovation and technology.
Yeah, so you have that culture of innovation, and then supported by great location, great facility to bring companies in. Makes sense. Okay, and Shayna, what's your approach?
Sure. So at UTA, we are lucky to have a dedicated innovative mobility solutions group. We partner throughout our agency looking at how operations could become more efficient, more cost effective, and how we can create a better experience for the rider using connected and automated vehicles, using on-demand services. So trying to take, incremental steps. So UTA is invested in our team to look for those opportunities. We're in the state of Utah. We're fortunate to be close to California. and we're familiar with some of the great organizations out of California, like CalSTART. And I will mention this cohort of transit agencies called the Connected and Automated Transit Users Forum. That has been a really helpful resource. It's a peer community led by CalSTART where we can exchange ideas about vendors who can provide what solution. So that's been really helpful. And then in project spaces, when we are doing a pilot project, the procurement rules are not as strict. So we can do a bid invitation to, I think it's a minimum of 3 different vendors. And so we just need a short list of folks that we know can supply the solutions. And there was one other thing. Well, it'll come back to me. I'll hand it back to you, Virginia.
Okay. And I guess also, Shana, you have a strong partner there with Utah DOT too. So partnerships with others, other agencies or other organizations in your area, probably important, right?
That was a regional collaboration with the DOT, the state, and we're maybe the opposite of California in that the companies may not be coming directly to want to test and run programs here. This is more of an under the radar location. We don't have a ton of visibility. We also don't have regulations, reporting, or licensing requirements that are unique to the state. So it's quite different.
Okay, thanks everybody. We have about just 10 minutes left in this conversation. I want to be sure to touch on 2 main things. The challenges, I guess, to hear from everyone what your challenges might be, and then maybe wrap up also with the benefits. What benefits are you expecting with these deployments, as well as maybe what benefits have you seen already? So let's go do kind of a round robin about the challenges, and feel free to kind of comment on each other. We can keep this kind of more of an informal discussion too, but just briefly, what are some of the challenges that you've overcome with the projects that you're talking about here? Whoever wants to go first.
I could touch on that. This is Jack with CCTA. So challenges are, I would say the main challenge is funding. So we're a self-help county. We collect a sales tax, and that's how we fund our transportation projects in the county. But the sales tax is based off a transportation expenditure plan that the voters approve, and they voted on that in 2004. Well, technology wasn't a part of that transportation expenditure plan. So we're obligated to spend our funds that we receive on projects that were voted on. So what we have to do is chase grants mainly, and except for on the, we chase grants, and we've been very successful on that, but then we also form public-private partnerships, and that's where Momentum Station comes involved, and that's how our money comes in. So I would say funding is probably our biggest challenge.
Any other challenges out there besides funding?
This is Pete. A long list. Never done this before, so every single step along the way is a brand new one, giant leap for us. Starting with the fact that we got our federal award about 1 week before COVID hit, and normally when you win a federal grant, you celebrate it and advance it and further it as much as you can. We given the fact that we have a unionized workforce for our transit, we certainly did not want to distract what the realities were going on during COVID, when our workforce had to show up and provide critical service to our constituents to get to and from when they need to go during COVID. And so, the fact that this technology, certainly we're not replacing any drivers. The driver plays a very active role in our project and will continue to do so for the long foreseeable future. But that is definitely certainly a major challenge to work through about how to deploy automated transit with the workforce, especially a unionized workforce, to not raise concerns about losing opportunities for employment, or making sure they have a defined role in the project and in transit operations in general. So that's definitely be an ongoing one that we have. But every single, like I said, every single decision, every single thing that we have to do for this project has never been done before. And it's a long list of challenges for the project, but.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, this is really pioneering work. It's tough to be the first one to be doing things, but I think over the past, 5-6 years, we're seeing more and more deployments. So it's really all about sharing information and, having peer exchanges, things like that to learn from each other so that we can make it easier for the next folks who give that a try or to, evolve the project to better meet the demands and what the constraints of what, what happened in prior projects. On VTA side, do you have any challenges down there over?
I think Pete touched on the labor issue pretty well. That is an enormous question. How do our bus drivers feel about VTA pursuing autonomous technology? And it's something we have to be very mindful of. I think I'd also echo something Pete said in that we don't really know where we're going. We're trying out some things now, and we're going to have to see what problems come up and make some decisions based on what our next steps are. And I worry a little bit that our innovation future at VTA is going to be a little too much driven by maybe elected official interests. I don't know how many times I've heard, we're Silicon Valley, we should be doing XYZ at the transit agency. And I want to make sure that everything we're doing is grounded within the mission of the agency of, trying to get to a better future, that we're not just pursuing technology for technology's sake. And that can be a bit of a difficult argument to make sometimes.
Thanks, Adam. So not only having that culture of innovation, but having a strong vision and mission to make sure that projects and pilots are on that path that is agreed upon for the future. Shayna, any challenges over in Utah?
It's the same here. Peter and Adam touched on it's labor, funding. It's taking what is brand new and building it into a strategic vision that is a 20-year plan. So we rely on our strategic planning team and our service planning team. We update those plans once a year, and it's a 5-year rolling service plan. So we're trying to bake in more automated and connected use cases into projects that already have vehicles or have capital budget allocated and operational funding. So the cost gap is just, that AV stack technology. What's the difference there to take this to a more advanced service delivery? And again, looking at the customer value, are they, say, saving time? Are they having safer rides? How do we measure that objectively to show that there's a good return on UTA's investment?
Thanks, Shayna. And that kind of goes into my next question. Like, let's shift gears with the last 5 minutes that we have here to talk about the opportunities, the benefits. We heard in our first panel how the focus is on providing automated vehicle solutions to address safety, mobility, sustainability, efficient delivery of goods. Those are the goals from the technology side. Do those mirror what your goals are within your agency and what you're seeing as potential benefits or benefits actually with the pilots that you have in the field right now?
Absolutely. On the clean energy side, as I mentioned, we're transitioning our fleet to fully electric, and these buses will be electric as well. So one of the things that we're looking forward to seeing is some of the benefits that maybe automation may be able to further enhance, let's say, the range of a battery electric bus, so that it can stay on the road as long as we need it to stay on the road, given constraints of current battery configurations to date. So some of the things that we're looking at is, have more fluid acceleration and deceleration, so to speak, and increasing the longevity of the battery as a benefit. Obviously, safety being a huge benefit, trying to further improve safety, especially through intersections, at stations and other points along the route. And further enhancing mobility as well, for our passengers. So definitely share many of the benefits that was presented by industry.
I guess Jack, at CCTA, with Go Minimum Station, have you been able to see or to realize some benefits and with the testing that goes on out there, or other pilots that you've had?
Sure. So I was, so Virginia, a project that you're actively involved at here here at CCTA is our Innovate 680 project, where we're using multiple approaches to try to improve transportation along this corridor. And then the part of that project is public outreach. And so what we've seen is that the public is really looking forward to autonomous vehicles and using that mode of transportation. And so that's a positive. I take that as a very positive for advancing this technology.
Yeah, the traveler behavior work that's being done as part of that project to understand how people will adopt to it, or that they want to try it, they want to give it a try, they want to change their traveler behavior to be more shared, to be more efficient. I think that's a great project to reference here. All right, Adam, anything more to add about benefits that you're seeing?
I think there's so much optimism now about how these systems can benefit the future, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. And my mind always goes to a place of, sure, even if the technology works, will the passenger experience be exactly what we want it to be? Will this be something that we can deploy cost effectively at scale? It can be a wonderful technology, but it might not be the thing that we actually need to maximize the benefit to our customers, to our riders out there. And, we have so many other overlapping goals at our agency, things like accessibility and, equity, helping those disadvantaged populations. We want to make sure that these technologies aren't just benefiting other groups. So it's got to fit within our entire mission and customer focus.
Absolutely. Okay, well, with that, I think we're going to wrap up our second panel. Let's see, I have there's a comment here from Emily. Would be wonderful if we could share that information about rider perspective and opinions about embracing AV technology. Yeah, we'll be sure to do that, and I can get that information over to you. Okay, thank you so much, panel. Really appreciate your input and sharing the work that you're doing with your deployments and other activities within your agency. So if we could give an applause, we could give an applause. So thanks, everybody. We're going to transition now over to the breakouts. So let's see. So our format for the breakouts, we have about 68 participants I see in Zoom. So behind the scenes, we've been arranging how those breakouts are going to work. Each breakout will have one panelist and one facilitator there to help with the discussion about the applications of AVs in the county. So this will be in a small group setting. We will ask that you turn on your video so we can really have a good dialogue. The facilitators will have some sort of introduction so everyone knows who's in the room. And we'll have just about 25 minutes to have these breakout discussions, and then we'll reconvene as a larger group to share information, share a little bit about what happened in those breakouts, and then wrap up the workshop. So I guess Patrick or anyone else, am I missing anything before we pull everybody into the rooms?
I don't think so. Naomi, we should be good to go.
All up in the rooms right now. Thanks.
Okay. Again, thanks everybody for your participation in the two panels.
Diane, Jean, JY, and Marie, if you could click accept for the breakout room, that would be great. Thank you.
So Naomi, I am one of the
Oh yes, sorry, Jean.
yeah, so I wasn't going to join. Yeah. I'm just supporting.
Ian and Joyce as well, if you could accept. One more time, I sent the invitation to join a breakout room to Diane, JY, Marie, Oleg, Ian, and Jean. So if you wouldn't mind accepting. Oh, JY, thanks for the message.
And I will not be joining since I'm just facilitating.
Oh, yeah, Jean, I'm sorry. Again. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hi, Naomi.
I am going to assign you to a breakout room if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a little late, clearly. So.
Oh, no problem at all.
Okay.
Let's see. Your name just disappeared. Let's see if I can move you.
might help if I unmuted myself to chat. Welcome back to the group, everyone. We now will go through a little bit of a report back and then have a prioritization exercise as well. For folks not presenting, if we could ask you to stop sharing your video so we'll be able to see the folks who are participating. Again, thank you for joining the small groups. I know mine found it particularly valuable. So excited to see that progress. I think I'm going to introduce Steve before we do the report back. So Steve will be helping us. Steve Kusiemba is WSP's National ITS and Connected Autonomous Vehicles Practice Lead. With more than 30 years of experience, he is he's a nationally recognized expert in connected vehicle communications and has helped a number of agencies stand up working groups to talk through issues such as readiness for autonomous vehicles and pilot projects in conjunction with private companies to test connected and automated vehicles. So with that, I would like to welcome Steve.
Thanks, Patrick. Did you want to have any formal report back from the individual groups, or did you want me to just dive into this next prioritization discussion?
I can have each of the facilitators give a brief kind of overview of what their groups talked about really quick. If we want to have, we can start with breakout number 1. Start with Lauren, if you want to give some highlights of the stuff, some key takeaways from your group.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. For breakout group number 1, we had a very interesting conversation around how AVs are approaching people with disabilities, whether it's vision or mobility or whatever other kinds of disabilities, and how pilots are a useful feature of testing out all these different use cases, because there's only so much you can simulate in a lab. It's really about getting out into the real world and understanding people's actual activities. And then also a good discussion around equity and our approach to how AVs can serve those different communities. Thanks.
Great. Group 2, Jeremy, do you want to give some highlights from your group?
Sure. So first we sort of talked a little bit about how things like fixed guideway or other things can sort of help get things started or try things out, because it's a little easier to start on that side. And we also how the sort of differences between different AV companies have different funding levels, and that can affect the types of things they're capable of doing and sort of what to be prepared for. Particularly, like, are we just talking about clear lines and updated, or do they need connectivity to, say, the intersections? But then when we were talking about potential applications in San Mateo County, we ended up focusing mostly on needs of the senior community. Sort of hearing, like, for some people, they're relying on Uber or Lyft, or driving maybe when it's getting close to the end of when they can. And then difficulty of, like, well, do we buy an electric vehicle or not? And how much better it would be if AVs came sooner. And then sort of thinking about what types of places would be good to serve them, what places are not currently served well necessarily by transit, and sort of comparing that sort of to basically how TNCs are kind of filling part of that gap now, but AVs can also serve well the senior community.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. Lori, group number 3.
Sure, hi. We had a really great group discussion. One of the questions that kind of came up was about how infrastructure, whether it's county or city, and green infrastructure, such as like trees and bulb outs, can impact like AV technology and how the two can work together. And then for applications, there was a lot of great ideas about corporate campuses being great places for a start, and also short haul shuttles from like Caltrain and office parks, and schools as well, like such as the Stanford campus. And then also similar to Connecticut DOT, thinking of our express lane from 101 into the ECR express route, having, some driven, some automated. And then as far as like deployment goes, there was a great idea to have more electeds and officials and agencies tour and see the demos to have greater understanding of them. And then as far as concerns go, there's some about increasing congestion with additional vehicles on the roads. So, yeah.
Thank you, Lori. Virginia, breakout number 4.
Yeah, I want to commend all of our participants for sharing their great ideas. We had a great discussion in our working group. We spent a bit of time talking about different applications. So, where we would like to see the AVs in San Mateo County, things like 101 express lanes, El Camino Real, leveraging the California Connected Testbed on El Camino Real right now, then meeting the needs of Dunbarton Corridor, and also linking to transit hubs. So those are all great ideas as far as applications. Steps to take. The 2 priority steps that kind of came through to me were documents. So let's get what the plan is on paper, whether that's planning level, policy level, create that plan, that vision, or even like on the technical side, what is the fiber infrastructure look like? What's the equipment in the field? Just documenting those things that can help support AV deployments in the future will not only get you ready to get ahead of the conversation on this, but also could help prepare you for grants and other funding opportunities as they come along. And then the last thing, the biggest concerns that came up are safety and equity. So making sure that these solutions are available to everybody, to the traveling public, and making sure that they're safe so that they can, be sustainable and be continued to be used into the future.
Thank you, Virginia. Peter Skinner, what about group number 5?
Great, thank you. Yeah, we had a very good discussion. One of the key points that was brought up is, essentially is related to the availability, transparency and consistency of safety data, when we have, this competitive environment between, various AV companies. So it's, I think basically the discussion focused on that, the current state of data really isn't sufficient for cities and localities to understand, how safe these AV pilots are and how they are evolving to become more safe for cities to really dive into that. Also, cities should also consider having a clear strategic plan or vision in what they would like to see in terms of autonomous vehicle pilots, rather than having a company approach the jurisdiction and telling them what they want from the city. And then lastly is really how to use autonomous vehicle technology to reduce traffic congestion. And we also had a great comment about shared autonomous vehicles and what's important for residents, essentially the consistency of availability of the vehicles, safety, of course, and then cleanliness. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And then I'll touch on the last group, my group number 6. We talked about some potential applications in areas like Brisbane, where there is hilly terrain and people have a hard time walking to current bus stops, or to Caltrain, where a first last mile shuttle could really make a difference in mobility to transit. So we've talked about those first mile, last mile. We talked about other shuttle applications around the county, really focusing on what public-private partnerships might be needed. I think at some of these corporate campuses, like you mentioned, like what I heard mentioned earlier, and then really similar with these kind of like action plans, planning documents, really focusing on that we're making policy decisions related first about safety, and then thinking about how infrastructure investments may need to change to make sure we're having efficient services. Our group really liked the idea of the backbone routes and the structures that could be important to address, like guideways or other safety loading, boarding infrastructure to make it easier for all people to use these types of technologies. One of the big things we heard was that collaboration and knowledge sharing is a really big thing that we'd like to focus on kind of on a county-wide level. And even taking a look beyond San Mateo County and how we partner with our folks at VTA and in San Francisco to make sure we're fully accessing things like the express lanes on 101 that are going to be coming online here shortly, and will extend eventually all the way, hopefully, from San Jose all the way up to San Francisco. On the equity side, we really talked about ways in which we should be thinking about long-range planning of our workforce and making sure that all types of people have jobs accessible in San Mateo County, that they can get to those jobs, that people have access to this technology, and that people, that we are maintaining our employer workforce at all levels. Great. Thank you all for participating in the small groups, and then I'll hand it back off to Steve.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. And it was just, first of all, thank you to each of the 6 facilitators for your concise, quick, bullet points. Those were short breakout groups, but they each accomplished a lot. And when you look at the breadth and the depth that came across those 6 areas, it really reflects the breadth and the depth of the feedback that we got from the panel as well. So in this short 2-hour workshop, congratulations, folks. You're really getting a lot of great things out on the table. And to borrow something that Dr. Rosekind said earlier about ongoing dialogue is really an important key step. And it's good that we're having this. So what we want to do next here in the workshop, as we begin to wind down here, is we want to collect some important information from each of you. This is the interactive portion. So if you're multitasking, I'm going to give you a warning right now. We're going to have a series of 5 different poll questions that we're going to hit you with. So if you're multitasking, now's the time to stop, to pay attention, and just give us a few minutes of your time and your thoughts as we go through some of these key poll questions. So let me start with the very first one, which is to really help us kind of gauge who is part of this conversation. So Jeremy, if you want to launch the first question of what type of participant are you, or what type of organization do you represent? Is it, are you part of the San Mateo County? Are you a regional or a state agency? Are you a community-based or advocacy organization? Are you a private company or an economic group? Are you simply an interested member of the public, or the vaunted other category of other, which might not fit into any one of those? So take another 30 seconds here and try to get more answers. We have 52 participants and only 22 that have answered. So again, those of you that are multitasking, this is your wake-up call. Let's try to get you on here and try to get a few more answers captured here. Give it another 20 or 30 seconds. All right, it looks like we've kind of capped out here. So what you can see, we do have a fairly healthy mix of regional, private, and interested members, but we do have an overwhelming of San Mateo County representation, which is good. So that's good to have that. The second question that we're going to get into is, do you think your city or town would be interested in developing or testing pilot projects? So Jeremy, if you want to try to launch that second one. And it's a simple yes, no, or not sure answer. Do you think your city or town would be interested? And again, if you are a private interest, think about the city or town that you are in, that you live in, or that or that is perhaps within the San Mateo County jurisdictional area that you might either represent or be part of. All right. Looks like, again, we got 3/4 of you saying yes. That's great. That was one of the most important things to come out of today, was to A, increase your awareness of what a lot of this is about, but B, also to gauge what your interest might be in going forward. And it's clear, and I hope all you private companies that are on here are paying attention, it's clear there's a lot of interest in this particular area. So then the third question, let's take it a next step further? And what types of opportunities or applications do you think would be good candidates in your own city or town? And again, Jeremy, go ahead and launch this. I'll talk over about that. When we talk about this, by the way, you can select up to 3. So you do have opportunities to select more than one. We talked a lot, we heard a lot of the speakers talk about solving a specific problem. We don't want to do technology for technology's sake. So these are a couple options here. Again, there are really an endless universe of applications that we could start talking about of automation technology. We're focusing mainly on what you heard a lot today, which is more of the moving people, the transit type activities. Yes, delivery is on here, and I realize delivery could be in itself an entire workshop, an entire subgenre of automation when we talk about freight delivery. But we'd be interested to see what kind of types of applications or projects you all think might be good to explore. Give you another couple seconds here. All right, let me show you what we got here. And again, as you can see from the results, a lot of interest in first, last mile transit access, and a lot of interest in paratransit or specialized senior services. We heard a lot about that. I know in a couple different breakout groups that was discussed. We heard it from all of the public sector speakers about the importance of first, last mile transit access. So this is a good data point to get that 90% of you that answered this question feel that that's really valuable and it's really important. So let's take this one more, let's keep peeling this onion back and go to the next layer. What short-term local action do you think is needed to first begin preparing for the future potential of AV deployment pilots? And again, yes, we've talked about a number of these different options that you're seeing on here in some of the groups and in some of the panel sessions, whether it's policies. I know we heard a couple times, we heard from Emily talking about policies that we could do on this. We heard other folks talking about action plans or strategic plans, identifying champions, having staff resources, having technical assistance, community engagement, specific infrastructure improvements that might be needed. Now, again, you can select up to 3, and it's quite possible that every one of these might be needed. But it is helpful for San Mateo County and for the folks that are working on this to really have some idea of what you, the participants, feel are some of the key priorities. And I'll give you another 20 or 30 seconds here to make sure that you've been able to read through these. I want to also take the opportunity to thank all of our panelists earlier today, both from the private and the public sector. Had some really, really great input from all of you that I know is going to help the county move forward here. Okay, so sharing these needs here, as you can see, action plan and feasibility studies, way up there. Community engagement, way up there. Infrastructure improvement, that one was surprisingly way up there as well. While identifying champions and having policies was also important, it was not nearly as important to many of you as getting together this action plan and getting the community together to talk about it. So that leads us then to our final question, our fifth and final question of what countywide support or coordination would be beneficial to promoting AV or connected transit in San Mateo County. And again, we're talking mainly about transit based on a lot of the first, last mile and paratransit that we just heard earlier in question 3. So what countywide support or coordination? Do you need to have more workshops like this? Is there specific training? We heard several of the folks talk about the value and importance of knowledge sharing. Having a dedicated AV working group. We heard Dr. Rosekind say that getting a task force or working group together and developing a strategic plan and exploring how you can complement transit is certainly important. It's reflected in some of these options here. Is it important to have a dedicated AV coordinator or planner or engineer within the county? Should there be a county-wide planning study or a larger regional study or action plan that goes on? This is a little bit more longer question, so I'll give you all another 10 or 15 seconds. Okay, this is probably not going to surprise many of you. The answer is all of the above. And that's okay. That's okay, because what that says is that really mirrors the earlier question about, is there interest? 90% of you said, yes, there's interest. So obviously, many of you feel there's a lot of value to getting together working groups, to using these work groups to either have training or workshops, to use these working groups to have knowledge sharing, to explore funding opportunities, you know, to do studies, to do a strategic plan type activity. So the good news is that all of the above really does reflect the strong interest that we had there. And of course, as you can see, the largest number there, 75% of you felt that we needed some sort of a planning study or action plan. That does reflect what we heard in the breakout groups. It reflects what we heard from many of the speakers. As we wind down here, before I turn it back to Patrick, just a couple quick observations also that I want to point to. And I want to circle back to the very beginning when Patrick said, you're charged with this workshop. Really, we want to hear from you on, do we want pilot projects? And if so, what kind of projects and where? And I think we really started to address a lot of that throughout this dialogue and throughout this conversation with the 50 to 75 of you that have been part of this during this past 2 hours. We heard loud and clear that safety is paramount. We heard that shared transportation is important to our future. We heard that there's a lot of interest in pilots and that pilots need to solve a specific problem. We don't want to do technology just for technology's sake. I particularly, there's a couple quotes that I definitely captured that we'll want to, you know, that we'll want to document. In particular, Dr. Rosekind saying, you want to change congestion in cities? It's all about shared. That was blunt, was to the point, and it's really accurate of what we're doing. But when we talk about transportation and automation, it's more than just the dense urban cities. There's a lot of other special needs, whether it's paratransit needs, whether it's movement of goods, whether it's helping connect the everyday commuter to more transit options. And we talked about that through a lot of the panels and in a lot of the breakout groups. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, funding is a challenge. Yes, resources are a challenge. But funding and resources can be overcome if there is interest and if there is energy. Just by the mere fact of having this workshop today, you've demonstrated you have the energy, you have the enthusiasm, and thanks to Patrick and thanks to the folks that have put this together, you have the focus. So now is your opportunity to kind of push forward and develop whatever sort of working groups or task forces that you need to do this. This is your opportunity to do it. So Patrick, congratulations to you and the team. I think you had a very successful conversation, and now is the opportunity to take it forward and make it happen.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. My contact information is up on the screen. If you have any other thoughts or suggestions for things you'd like to see next, as we've all established today, this is our kind of first foray in San Mateo County into this realm of autonomous vehicles and all of its potential applications. And as you've heard from many of our speakers, we've only begun to skim the surface of the applications that are out there and the level of detail and work that takes to get these programs off the ground. I want to give a quick plug to our alternative congestion relief and transportation demand management plan that we are developing and will release at the December meeting of the TA board. And in that is a intelligent transportation systems category, which does allow for planning and policy development for autonomous vehicles and pilots. So we're excited to use that plan to provide some seed funding, hopefully for cities that may be interested and start having discussions about autonomous and shared autonomous vehicles. Thank you all for joining us. We're end a little bit before 12. I'm impressed we've stayed on schedule. And thank you all for joining us today. We hope we will have more of these to come. Have a wonderful day.